Life Stories invites you to witness an inspiring journey of courage, resilience, and transformation. In today's story, meet Dana Harris, a trailblazing leader who became the first Black woman mayor of her city. What began as a mission to bring justice and change soon turned into a battle against deeply entrenched corruption, testing her strength and resolve in unimaginable ways. Through betrayal, danger, and unyielding resistance, Dana's determination to fight for her community shines as a beacon of hope. Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's incredible tale of one woman's journey to reshape a city and inspire us all. Dana Harris never set out to make history, but history had a way of finding her. She was no stranger to hard work, nor to challenges that seemed insurmountable. Growing up in a small, underserved neighborhood in Crestwood, she had seen firsthand what it meant to persevere. Her mother, a single parent, worked tirelessly, juggling 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Dana's childhood was a patchwork of struggle and hope, stitched together with her mother's unyielding determination to provide a better life. That spirit of resilience shaped Dana, even as she climbed to heights no one from her neighborhood had dared dream of. Her election as Crestwood's first Black woman mayor was a monumental achievement. To her, though, it wasn't just a personal victory, it was a symbol of what could be achieved when a community came together to demand change. Dana saw herself as a bridge between Crestwood's troubled past and the future it deserved. But she also knew that bridges had to bear immense weight. And the weight of leadership was heavier than anything she'd carried before. On her first day in office, Dana walked through the halls of City Hall with quiet determination. Her presence was commanding yet unassuming, her steps purposeful. Staff members paused in their routines, watching her pass, some with curiosity, others with apprehension. Dana felt the eyes on her, not just seeing her but assessing her, doubting her, questioning if she could live up to the demands of her new role. She didn't flinch under their scrutiny. Her office, spacious and grand, was already cluttered with reports and briefings awaiting her attention. As she sat behind the desk for the first time, she allowed herself a brief moment to reflect. The desk wasn't just a piece of furniture, it symbolized years of sacrifice, grit, and faith. It was where decisions would be made that could shape lives. Dana felt the enormity of it. But instead of being overwhelmed, she was energized. She began her day with a ritual she'd developed over the years, a quiet moment of reflection. Closing her eyes, she thought about the streets of Crestwood where she'd grown up, the cracked sidewalks, the neglected playgrounds, the faces of neighbors who had struggled but never lost their spirit. Those memories grounded her, reminding her why she had fought so hard to be here. Dana's to-do list was daunting. The city had been plagued by years of neglect, and its problems didn't just sit idly, they loomed like shadows over every decision. The most pressing issue was police reform. Crestwood's police department had a long history of strained relations with its residents, particularly in minority communities. Complaints of racial profiling and excessive force were common, and trust in law enforcement was at an all-time low. Previous administrations had turned a blind eye, and Dana knew that her commitment to addressing this issue would not make her popular among certain circles. During her first meeting with department heads, Dana presented her vision for reform. Her tone was calm but resolute, outlining plans for community policing, improved accountability, and initiatives to rebuild trust. But the room was thick with tension. Chief Robert Callahan, a towering figure with a gruff demeanor and decades of experience, sat across from her, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He listened in stony silence, his face betraying a mixture of skepticism and irritation. "Madam Mayor," he said finally, his voice heavy with restrained disdain, "I trust you understand the implications these changes will have on officer morale and performance. We're already stretched thin, and adding more oversight will only burden us further." Dana met his gaze, unflinching. "Chief Callahan, I understand the challenges your officers face. But these changes are not optional. Our community deserves to feel safe, respected, and valued. Without accountability, we cannot build trust. And without trust, this city cannot heal. Her words were met with silence. Callahan's jaw tightened, and a faint murmur rippled through the room. Dana could feel the resistance radiating from certain officials. The subtle eye rolls. The shared glances that dismissed her authority. It wasn't just professional pushback, it was deeply personal. She was disrupting a system that had grown comfortable in its dysfunction. And her very presence was a challenge to the status quo. Despite the tension, Dana pressed forward. She spent late nights poring over proposals, speaking with community leaders, and drafting policies that she believed could create real change. But the weight of opposition began to take its toll. Resistance came not just from the police department but from within City Hall itself. Some officials questioned her decisions under the guise of concern for the city's welfare, their thinly veiled prejudice cutting deeper than overt criticism ever could. Dana bore it all with quiet strength, drawing on the lessons her mother had taught her about resilience and grace. But behind her calm exterior, she felt the strain. There were moments, late at night in the solitude of her office, when doubt crept in. Was she in over her head? Could she really turn the tide in a city so resistant to change? Her resolve was tested further when the threats began. A note left on her doorstep read, "We know where you live. Watch your back." It was a stark reminder of the dangers she faced. Not just as a politician but as a woman daring to challenge a deeply entrenched system. Dana kept the note to herself, refusing to let fear dictate her actions. Instead, she used it as fuel. She knew that her fight wasn't just about policies or politics, it was about people. It was about the kids in Crestwood who deserved safe streets to play on, the families who deserved to feel secure in their neighborhoods, and the countless residents who had been silenced for far too long. The battle ahead would be grueling, but Dana Harris had never been one to back down. As the days turned into weeks, Dana Harris found herself in the thick of a battle that was as exhausting as it was invisible. On the surface, she maintained her poise, but beneath the calm exterior, she could feel the currents of resistance growing stronger. The tension wasn't just in the boardrooms or council meetings, it seeped into the very fabric of Crestwood, revealing itself in whispers, sidelong glances, and the conspicuous silence of those who had once claimed to support her. The note she had received weighed heavily on her mind. It was chilling not just for its directness but for what it symbolized, a clear message that her fight for change had made her enemies, some of whom were bold enough to act on their hatred. Yet, Dana refused to let fear dictate her actions. Each morning, she stepped into City Hall with her head held high, greeting her staff and colleagues with the same quiet determination. She had grown used to the subtle forms of resistance, questions posed with a veneer of politeness but meant to undermine her, meetings where her authority was barely acknowledged, and the growing coldness of Chief Callahan's demeanor. The chief was a seasoned officer, a man who had spent decades climbing the ranks of Crestwood's police department. He exuded an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance, and Dana often wondered if he saw her as a legitimate leader or merely an inconvenient figurehead. Meetings with him were particularly fraught. His words were measured, his tone clipped, but there was no mistaking the disdain that colored their interactions. One morning, during a briefing on her proposed reforms, Dana presented her plans for community policing, a strategy aimed at fostering trust between officers and the residents they served. As she spoke, she noticed Callahan shift in his seat, his jaw tightening. "Madam Mayor," he began when she finished, his voice dripping with condescension. "While I appreciate your optimism, these reforms are unrealistic. My officers are already overworked and underfunded. Adding these initiatives will only weaken their morale and, frankly, compromise their effectiveness." Dana met his gaze, unwavering. "Chief Callahan, I understand the pressures your department faces, but these reforms are necessary. Building trust isn't a burden, it's the foundation of effective policing." Our community needs to feel that the law works for them, not against them. These changes are non-negotiable." The room fell silent, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Dana could feel the eyes of the other officials darting between her and Callahan, as though they were witnessing a silent battle of wills. Callahan's face remained impassive, but Dana could see the faintest flicker of something in his eyes, anger, perhaps, or frustration. Whatever it was, he quickly masked it with a curt nod. The meeting ended, but the hostility lingered. Dana returned to her office, her mind racing. She knew she had rattled Callahan, and she knew he wouldn't take it lightly. For all his professionalism, he was a man deeply entrenched in the old ways of doing things, and her insistence on change threatened his authority. Outside of City Hall, the city itself seemed to mirror the unease within its walls. Dana began to notice a pattern during her morning runs: a police cruiser parked near her apartment building, officers lingering at the park's entrance. They didn't approach her, but their presence was unsettling. She told herself it was her imagination, that they were simply going about their duties. But the feeling of being watched was impossible to ignore. Her assistant, Teresa, was the first to voice her concerns. Loyal and fiercely protective, Teresa had been with Dana since her campaign days. One morning, as they went over the day's schedule, Teresa leaned closer, her voice low. "Dana, I'm hearing things," she said, her brow furrowed. "Staff members are talking whispers about people trying to push back. And not just with words." Dana set down her coffee, meeting Teresa's worried gaze. "I expected resistance. Teresa, people don't like change, especially when it challenges their comfort. This is more than that." Teresa insisted. "I don't want to scare you, but I think some of them might be looking for ways to make things difficult for you. Maybe even dangerous." Dana forced a small, reassuring smile. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not going to let fear dictate my actions. We have a city to fix, and I can't afford to lose focus." Teresa nodded, though the worry didn't leave her face. Dana tried to dismiss Teresa's warning, but the unease began to creep in. She had faced prejudice before, subtle and overt, but this was different. This felt personal. It felt calculated. And it wasn't just the officers or city officials, even some of Crestwood's residents seemed uneasy with her leadership. On her drives to and from City Hall, she occasionally noticed hostile glares from passers-by. She told herself it was a minority, that the majority of the city had voted for her because they believed in her vision. But doubt has a way of finding its way into the cracks of even the strongest resolve. Each night, as she sat in her quiet apartment, Dana replayed the day's events in her mind. She thought about the challenges ahead, the people she wanted to help, and the barriers she needed to break. She reminded herself of her purpose: the children who deserved safer streets, the families yearning for justice, the community that had placed their faith in her. But as she prepared for bed, the words from the note lingered in her mind, whispering their threat into the silence of the night. "We know where you live. Watch your back." Dana clenched her fists, forcing herself to breathe deeply. Fear could either paralyze or fuel her resolve, and she was determined that it would do the latter. The battle had just begun. The night was unusually quiet as Dana Harris left Crestwood City Hall, the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. It was nearly midnight, and the once bustling halls had long since emptied. Dana had stayed late, combing through reports and refining plans for an upcoming community event. She was tired but resolute. As she gathered her things, she glanced at the clock, the silence around her amplifying her thoughts. The parking lot outside was dimly lit, the faint hum of a street lamp the only sound accompanying her footsteps. Dana had parked her car at the far end, a small oversight she now regretted as the chilly night air wrapped around her. Still, she walked with the same purposeful stride she carried into every room, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete. Halfway to her car, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Two figures emerged from the shadows, their silhouettes unmistakable in the faint light. They were men in police uniforms, their badges glinting under the glow of the street lamp. For a moment, Dana's heart quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Evening, Madam Mayor," one of them called out, his tone light but carrying an unsettling edge. "Good evening," Dana replied, her voice steady. She continued walking, hoping to pass them without incident. But as she approached, one of the officers stepped directly into her path. "Leaving a little late, aren't we?" he asked, his gaze cold and assessing. Dana stopped, maintaining her composure. "Yes. I've had a long day. If you'll excuse me, I'd like to get home." The officer chuckled, exchanging a glance with his partner. "A lot of work. Huh. You've been making some big changes around here." His words hung in the air, their implication clear. Dana felt her pulse quicken, but she refused to show fear. "Change is necessary," she said firmly. "Crestwood deserves better, and I intend to make it happen." The second officer, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward, his expression darkening. "You think you can just waltz in here and tell us how to do our jobs?" His voice was low, menacing. Dana met his gaze. "I'm not telling you how to do your jobs. I'm holding you accountable to the people you serve." That was the moment the atmosphere shifted. The tension, already thick, snapped like a taut wire. Without warning, the second officer grabbed her arm, his grip vice-like. "Let go of me," Dana said, her voice firm but edged with anger. She tried to pull away, but his hold tightened. The first officer smirked. "You think you're powerful, don't you? Coming in here, stirring up trouble. Maybe you need a reminder of who's really in charge." Before Dana could respond, the second officer shoved her backward. She stumbled, catching herself against a parked car. Fear surged through her, but she steadied herself, refusing to let them see her panic. "You don't scare me," she said, her voice steely. The officers exchanged a glance, their smirks fading into something darker. "Maybe we should," one of them muttered, stepping closer. What followed was a blur of pain and terror. They grabbed her again, dragging her toward the far corner of the parking lot, away from the cameras and lights. Dana fought, kicking and twisting, but their strength overpowered her. Her protests fell on deaf ears as they pinned her against a cold metal surface, their taunts cutting as deeply as their actions. "You think you're untouchable," one sneered. "Let's see how untouchable you feel now." Dana's mind raced, desperation clawing at her as she searched for a way out. But their brutality left her no room to escape. Every punch, every shove, was a calculated attempt to break her spirit. When they finally stopped, Dana was barely conscious. Blood trickled down her face, and her body ached in ways she'd never imagined. She thought it was over. But then they tied her ankles together and hoisted her upside down from a nearby tree. The world spun around her, the throbbing in her head matching the ache in her chest. In the stillness of the night, she was left alone, suspended in the air like a grotesque warning. As time passed, Dana drifted in and out of consciousness. Memories of her childhood, her mother's unwavering resolve, and her own determination to create change flickered through her mind. Even in her pain, she clung to those images, refusing to let despair consume her. It was the sound of approaching footsteps that eventually pulled her back to the present. A young man's voice broke through the haze. Miss, are you okay?" Dana tried to respond, but her voice was barely a whisper. She felt hands working to untie her, the man's movements frantic yet gentle. "You're going to be okay," he said, his voice trembling. "Help is on the way." As sirens echoed in the distance, Dana allowed herself to close her eyes. She had survived. And even in her battered state, one thought remained crystal clear: she would not let them win. The first thing Dana Harris felt when she opened her eyes was pain, sharp and unrelenting. Her head throbbed, Her ribs ached with every breath, and her vision swam as the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room came into focus. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the memories came rushing back: the parking lot, the officers, the brutal attack. She shifted slightly, and a soft gasp escaped her lips. The sound caught the attention of Teresa, who was seated beside her, eyes rimmed red from worry. "Dana," Teresa whispered, leaning forward, her voice trembling with a mix of relief and anguish. "You're awake." Dana tried to smile, but it hurt too much. Instead, she gave a small nod, her throat too dry to speak. Teresa reached for a cup of water on the bedside table and carefully held it to Dana's lips. The cool liquid was a small mercy, soothing the fire in her throat. "You scared me," Teresa said, her voice breaking. "When I got the call," she stopped, wiping at her eyes. "I thought I'd lost you." Dana found her voice, though it was hoarse and faint. "It'll take more than that to get rid of me." Teresa let out a weak laugh, though tears still glistened in her eyes. "You're impossible. You know that." The weight of the situation pressed down on Dana as she looked at her friend's face. She knew Teresa was hiding the worst of her emotions, trying to be strong for her. But Dana could see the fear, the worry etched into her features. "How bad is it?" Dana asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Teresa hesitated, then glanced at the door, as if checking to see if anyone might overhear. "The bruises are bad," she said finally. "Your ribs are bruised, but nothing's broken. The cuts on your face, they'll heal." "But, Dana," she paused, her voice thick with emotion. This wasn't random. They were sending a message. Dana closed her eyes, the weight of Teresa's words settling over her. She had known from the moment the officers laid hands on her that this was personal. It wasn't just about intimidation, it was about power. About reminding her that her position, her voice, was a threat to the status quo. "I know," Dana said quietly, "but they didn't break me." Teresa's eyes flashed with a mix of pride and concern. "Dana, you can't keep this to yourself. The city needs to know what happened." Dana shook her head slowly, wincing at the movement. "Not yet. If I come forward now, they'll twist it. They'll make it about me. About politics. I need proof. Teresa. I need to expose them for what they are, fully and completely." Teresa nodded, though her worry didn't fade. "You don't have to do this alone," she said. "There are people who care about you. People who want to help." Dana reached out, placing a weak hand over Teresa's. "I know. And I'll need every one of them." The days that followed were a blur of pain and recovery. Nurses came and went, their expressions kind but professional. Teresa stayed by her side as much as she could, providing updates on city matters and filtering out anything that might cause Dana more stress. But even as her body healed, Dana's mind remained sharp, focused. She began reaching out to trusted allies, community leaders, activists, and a journalist named Rachel Wallace, whose reputation for exposing corruption was well known. Rachel visited Dana in the hospital, a notepad in hand and a determined glint in her eye. "I've heard the rumors," she said, her voice steady. "I want to help, but I need the truth, every detail." Dana hesitated, then nodded. "You'll get it. But not yet. First, we need to gather more evidence. I don't want this to be a story about me, I want it to be about the system that allowed this to happen." Rachel leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "You're a smart woman, Dana. Brave, too. Most people would crumble after what you've been through. I don't have the luxury of crumbling." Dana replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "This isn't just about me. It's about Crestwood. It's about everyone who's ever been silenced or ignored. I won't let them down." As the days passed, Dana's network of allies began to grow. Rachel started digging into the police department's records, uncovering a pattern of misconduct and cover-ups. Teresa worked behind the scenes, reaching out to community leaders who could lend their voices to the cause. Even Officer Malik Grant, a young and disillusioned member of the force, came forward, offering insights into the culture of intimidation and abuse within the department. His words painted a grim picture, but they also provided the kind of insider perspective Dana needed to build her case. Though her body was battered, Dana's spirit remained unbroken. Each new piece of evidence, each act of solidarity from her allies, fueled her determination. Late one evening, as she lay in her hospital bed, Dana stared out the window at the city skyline. The bruises on her body were a painful reminder of what she was up against. But they were also a badge of her resilience. They tried to break me, she whispered to herself. But they don't know who they're dealing with. Her fight was far from over. But Dana Harris was ready for whatever came next. Dana Harris's recovery was slow, each step forward reminding her of the attack she had endured. Yet, she refused to let the bruises on her body define her spirit. As the physical pain subsided, her resolve only deepened. This wasn't just about justice for herself, it was about holding accountable a system that had failed so many others. As she regained her strength, Dana began laying the groundwork for her next move. She couldn't take on the entrenched power of Crestwood's police department alone, and she knew it. The key to victory lay in building a coalition, one strong enough to challenge the very roots of corruption. The first person she called was Marcus Everett, a well-known community activist who had spent years fighting for social justice in Crestwood. Marcus was a man of the people, his passion for change matched only by his ability to inspire others. When he arrived at Dana's apartment one afternoon, his face was a mixture of concern and determination. "Dana, when I heard what happened, I was furious," he said, his deep voice steady but tinged with anger. "They think they can silence you. But they're wrong. Whatever you need, I'm in." Dana smiled, feeling the warmth of his support. "I need people, Marcus. People who are willing to stand up, to speak out, and to help expose what's really happening in this city. We can't do this quietly anymore. It's time to shine a light on the truth." Marcus nodded. "We'll get them. But we need a strategy. This fight isn't just about exposing the bad actors, it's about giving the community a voice. People are scared, Dana. They've seen what happens when you push back against power. That's why we have to show them we're stronger together." Dana replied, "If we stand united, they can't intimidate us." Together, they began reaching out to trusted allies, starting with Rachel Wallace, the investigative journalist who had already begun her own research into the police department. Rachel was relentless in her pursuit of the truth, her sharp mind and extensive network making her an invaluable asset. When Marcus and Dana met with her in a small cafe downtown, Rachel wasted no time diving into the details. "I've found a trail," she said, her notebook open in front of her. "Complaints of excessive force, racial profiling, and misconduct, some dating back years. Many of them were quietly dismissed or buried entirely. This isn't just about a few bad officers. It's systemic." Dana leaned forward, her expression intent. "We need more than just complaints. We need evidence that ties this to the leadership, the ones enabling this culture of abuse." Rachel nodded. "I'm working on it. I've got a few sources inside the department willing to talk. But they're scared. We need to protect them." One of those sources was Officer Malik Grant, a young officer who had grown increasingly disillusioned with the department's practices. Malik was hesitant when Marcus first reached out to him, but his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent. At their first meeting, held in the privacy of Dana's living room, Malik spoke in a hushed voice, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "It's bad in there," he admitted, his eyes downcast. "They cover for each other, bury complaints, and intimidate anyone who speaks up. If you step out of line, they make your life miserable." Dana placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Malik, I know how much courage it takes to come forward. Your voice can make a difference." but we'll do everything we can to keep you safe." As the coalition grew, so did their plan. Marcus began organizing community meetings, rallying residents to demand accountability and justice. Rachel continued gathering evidence, piecing together a story that would shake the foundations of Crestwood's police department. Malik provided crucial insights into the department's inner workings, helping to identify the key players responsible for perpetuating corruption. One evening, as the group gathered in Dana's apartment, the weight of their mission settled over them. Printed documents and handwritten notes covered the coffee table, each piece of evidence a step closer to the truth. "This isn't just about justice for me," Dana said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This is about every person in Crestwood who has felt powerless, who has been silenced or ignored. We're fighting for them." Marcus nodded, his expression firm. "And we'll win. But we have to be smart about this. Once we go public, they'll come after us with everything they've got. We need to be ready." Dana looked around the room, at the faces of her allies Marcus, Rachel, Malik, and Teresa. Each of them had put something on the line to stand with her. She felt a surge of gratitude and determination. "We're ready," she said. "They tried to break me, but all they've done is make me stronger. It's time for Crestwood to see the truth." In that moment, the group became more than just a coalition. They became a force, a beacon of hope for a city desperate for change. The coalition's efforts were beginning to take shape. But Dana Harris knew the hardest part of the battle was still ahead. The evidence they'd collected was damning, complaints that had been swept under the rug, emails detailing attempts to discredit victims, and first-hand accounts of intimidation within the department. But turning this information into action would require careful strategy and extraordinary courage. Late one evening, Dana and her team met in Marcus Everett's modest office at a community center. The room was small, its walls lined with books and posters promoting social justice initiatives. Papers and folders were spread across the table as Rachel Wallace outlined their plan. "We release the first piece of evidence to multiple news outlets simultaneously," Rachel said, tapping her pen against her notebook. "That way, the story can't be suppressed. The goal is to build momentum, to keep the pressure on with each new revelation." Marcus nodded. "And we need to mobilize the community. Protests, town halls, social media campaigns, anything to make sure people know what's at stake. This can't just be a story about corruption. It has to be about the future of Crestwood." Dana listened intently, her mind racing. She felt the enormity of what they were about to do, the risks they were taking. But she also felt a deep sense of purpose. This wasn't just about exposing wrongdoing, it was about giving a voice to the voiceless, about demanding justice for those who had been ignored for too long. As the meeting continued, Malik Grant arrived, his face pale and his movements hesitant. Dana could see the weight he was carrying, the fear of what might happen if he was discovered, the guilt of being part of a broken system. "I've got something," Malik said quietly, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "It's an internal memo from the chief's office. It outlines how to handle complaints of excessive force, basically, how to make them disappear." Rachel took the paper, her eyes scanning the document. Her expression hardened as she read. "This is exactly what we need," she said. "It's proof that this isn't just a few bad officers. It's a coordinated effort to protect abusers and silence victims." Dana placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. "You've done something incredibly brave, Malik. This could change everything." Malik nodded, though his eyes betrayed his anxiety. "I just want things to be different. I joined the force to help people, not to be part of this." As the team finalized their strategy, Dana felt a renewed sense of determination. They were no longer just reacting to the attack on her, they were taking the fight to the system that had enabled it. The first article hit the newsstands 2 days later. Written by Rachel, it detailed years of misconduct within the Crestwood Police Department, highlighting the stories of residents who had been ignored or dismissed. The response was immediate and explosive. Protests erupted outside City Hall and police headquarters, with residents demanding accountability. Signs reading "Justice for Crestwood and End Corruption" now filled the streets as people of all ages and backgrounds came together. Dana watched from her office window as the protests unfolded, a mix of emotions washing over her. She felt pride in the community's resilience, anger at the system's failures, and a deep sense of responsibility to ensure their voices were heard. But the backlash from the police department was swift. Chief Callahan held a press conference, dismissing the allegations as sensationalized and accusing the media of twisting the facts. His words were carefully chosen, but Dana could see the cracks in his armor. The evidence was too compelling, and the public wasn't buying his denials. Rachel followed up with a second article, this time including Malik's memo and anonymous testimonies from other officers who had witnessed corruption firsthand. The revelations sent shockwaves through Crestwood, further eroding trust in the police department. Inside the department, tensions were mounting. Officers who had long benefited from the status quo were scrambling to protect themselves, while others began distancing themselves from Callahan and his inner circle. Whispers of an internal investigation circulated, adding to the chaos. For Dana, the fight was personal, but it was also bigger than her. Each day, she reminded herself of the people who had elected her, the families who deserved safer neighborhoods, and the children who deserved better futures. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew it was worth it. One evening, as she prepared to leave City Hall, Teresa stopped her at the door. "Dana," she said softly, "you've started something incredible. But it's not just your fight anymore. You've given this city hope." Dana smiled, the weight of Teresa's words sinking in. "Hope is powerful," she replied. "But we still have a long way to go." As Dana walked out into the night, the sounds of distant protests filled the air. She knew the battle was far from over. But for the first time, she felt the tide beginning to turn. Crestwood was waking up, and its people were ready to fight for justice. As the dust settled in Crestwood, the city stood transformed not just by policies or protests, but by the unyielding spirit of its people. Dana Harris, once a target of hatred and fear, became a symbol of resilience and justice. Her coalition's fight had exposed the rot within the system, and the reforms they championed began to take root. The city saw brighter days ahead, with neighborhoods revitalized and trust slowly rebuilt. Dana walked through Crestwood with her head held high, knowing the scars she bore were the price of progress. But her journey was far from over. "Change doesn't end with one victory," she said in a final speech to her supporters. "It begins with our commitment to keep fighting." Dana's story reminds us all, courage can ignite transformation. Subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales of resilience and hope.